Do not forget these 4 crucial steps before you let a tenant move into your rental property. My name is Rich Carey from Rich on Money. I'm a property manager, realtor, and real estate investor. Here are the 4 crucial steps. Number 1, they've got to pay the security deposit. That shows they've got skin in the game. Number 2, they got to sign that lease. They're taking a legal step. Number 3, they're going to put utilities in their name. And lastly, number 4, this one's very important. They don't move in until all 4 of these happens. They have to pay the first month's rent. And there's a certain way they've got to pay it. I'll get into this. Some bonus information I'm throwing in at the end. I'm going to talk about my hacks for handling people who pay late and handling the eviction process, including the first eviction letter. Let's dive into number 1. They've got to give a deposit. Let's say your rental property is $2,000 a month and there's a $2,000 security deposit. We're going to talk about the difference between a holding deposit and security deposit. This can be very important legally because you want to be able to keep this deposit if they say they're moving in and then a month later they change their mind and go somewhere else. A security deposit is money that tenants give you, usually 1 month's rent. When they move out of the property, if there's damage to the property or unpaid rent, you can use this security deposit towards that. If there's anything left, it gets sent back to them, maybe all the money. If they've caused extensive damage or unpaid rent, you take the security deposit and then you need to take them to court for the rest. How's a holding deposit different? You should talk about holding deposits in your lease and explain this to them at some point. But a holding deposit is a deposit that you take so that you take this property off the market, stop showing it to other people because this person said they're moving in. That way, this person can maybe 2 weeks or a month and a half later move into the property when their lease ends and they can set up moving their furniture and all that stuff. Now, what happens sometimes is people promise to move in a month. That month rolls around and all of a sudden they ghost you, they never show up, or they just tell you, sorry, we moved somewhere else. Well, if you have a holding deposit, you can keep that holding deposit for your trouble, for the money that was wasted by not advertising it during that time. If there is no holding deposit, you're out that money and you got to start re-advertising now. And it might be another month or 2 before you get somebody in. Now, the way I usually do this is the holding deposit, which let's say it's $2,000, becomes the security deposit once they move in. Now it's a normal security deposit and they get all or some of it back when they move out. So it's very important to explain this to them. The important thing to tell them is a lot of times they fight you on giving you a holding deposit before moving into the property. Just explain you have a very simple policy on this. Until you have a holding deposit, you keep showing the property to people, you keep advertising it, and the first person to give you that holding deposit is the one that it will be held for. Until then, keeps getting advertised. Too many times I've been screwed over on this one. Don't let it happen to you. Now, there's another issue about this money. For holding deposit and for first month's rent, you want to have verified or instantaneous funds. Sometimes there are ways of paying money that can take several days to clear. I think of things like writing a personal check, even doing like an ACH transfer with certain kinds of software. In these particular 2 cases, it can take 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 days for that money to actually clear. You could find out later that the money never went through. You don't want this to happen with a holding deposit or a first month's rent because the idea is you want to make sure you have both of those things before they physically move into the property. There's something called a professional tenant. A professional tenant is someone who specializes in moving into properties without paying any money up front, and then once they're into the property, they're going to stay there until you have to evict them. Depending on your state and whether or not you know what you're doing, it could take 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year to get them out. And they live there for free the whole time. You got to fix things when they break while they're there until you're able to legally get them out. You don't want a professional tenant in your property without first month's rent and security deposit paid. That's why you want some type of instantaneous fund for these 2 things when that's not as important once they're into the property and you're getting the monthly rents. I like to do things like a cashier's check. You could do cash. I try to stay away from cash, but cash is okay if you're willing to take the time to get the money or meet them somewhere. I like things like Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, Zelle. These all have their pros and cons, but they're instantaneous. The money is there immediately. You know it's there. So those things are great for holding deposit, which becomes a security deposit later at move-in. And they're great for first month's rent. Until you have those 2 things in verifiable funds, they don't get the keys and actually move in to avoid the professional tenant situation I told you about. The next step, number 2, sign the lease. Holding deposit paid, get that lease signed. Again, it shows they're serious. If for some reason they're holding off on this, don't want to sign it, giving you BS about it, your spidey sense should go up. Maybe they're not planning on moving in. I use tenantcloud.com. It's a property management software that's kind of like a cloud thing online, and it has an app. I use that to manage all my properties. They've got online applications and they've got online leases. I love both. I just send an online lease to them and they can sign it on their phone or laptop, computer, desktop, whatever. So there's no issue of getting people in the same room so they can sign documents together, or I sign this one, I mail it to you, you sign it. That's old fashioned. I like these electronic ones and they don't have any problem holding up in court. This stuff's common now. Where do you find the best lease? I've heard a lot of things. People will sometimes say that realtors have leases for their states or their cities. When you read the fine print on these realtor leases, they often say that the person doing it needs to be a realtor, the person executing it. Those words are sometimes in the document. I don't know if I'd use this as a non-realtor. You can find leases online. I don't know if they've been vetted by an eviction attorney. I don't think it's a great idea. Here's the best thing to do. And you've just got to do this. Stop trying to be cheap. If you're going to have a rental property, you need to have an eviction attorney. You might have this eviction attorney and never do an eviction in your life, but you need an eviction attorney that you're working with while you have a rental property, because they're going to tell you how to do certain things. They're going to tell you what documents to sign when you want to end someone's lease, when they've agreed to move out early, right? When they've brought a pit bull in and you need them to get the pit bull out. These are all things when they've stopped paying and the letters that need to be sent. These are things that an eviction attorney advises on. They're going to go to court for you. An eviction attorney can provide you with a lease. It's got the wording they want, so they know what they're going to court with. Sometimes attorneys will take the lease that you have and look at it for you and bless it or add to it or change it. But you need to have an eviction attorney. You cannot do evictions by going to Facebook and asking other people how to do it. You cannot get this advice by asking some guru that you like in a different state to send you a copy of their lease. It's just not going to work. Something to understand about leases. People think, oh, I want to have the right words in my lease so that it's super landlord friendly and the tenants don't have as many rights. You can put whatever you want in a lease, but that doesn't mean that it's legal in your state. If you put something in there that's illegal and you want to evict somebody, you're going to have a problem with the judge. This is why eviction attorneys need to be involved in your leases. There's something called landlord-tenant law for your state. It's a bunch of boring stuff, but if you really want to understand this property management, if you really want to understand this legal stuff better, Google landlord-tenant law for your state. You may be surprised by what's in there, but it'll tell you things like how late fees need to be handled, maximums for late fees, how a security deposit should be returned, whether or not you can tell people to not do or do certain things in the lease. Reading that once, you might be like, oh, that's interesting. And sometimes you'll find things in there that are to your benefit that you didn't know before. But landlord-tenant law is different in every state. The eviction attorneys know all about this. It's probably good that you have an understanding of it too. Put utilities in your name. This is step 3. We're almost there. I like to make sure utilities are in the tenant's name before they move in. And there's ways you can verify this. Of course, you can just ask them. Here's some things that I've seen. I know that where I live in Montgomery, Alabama, each utility, and here the ones I think about are electric company, gas company, water company. Once somebody signed up, they will generate a letter that can be given to the landlord that proves that they've signed up for it and it starts on a certain day. So you can request that. That's one way of handling it. Sometimes utilities have something set up for landlords where there's an online portal for landlords and you can see whether that location is currently in your name or is now in somebody else's name. You can log into the property manager's portal or the landlord portal and see that. I do that here in Montgomery. It makes more sense when you have several properties. But that exists with most utility companies. You can ask about it. Property manager's portal, landlord portal, something like that. You fill out a little paperwork and it's more automated and easier. If they move out of the property, whether or not you know about it, those utilities will automatically switch into your name. And that can be good because when you send people in there to get it ready for the next tenant and they're like, oh crap, the water's off, oh crap, the electricity's off, this can tend to be a hassle. When you have more than one property, sometimes you might get confused on whether a certain property has gas or not. And I have a little list that reminds me which ones don't have gas, and then you don't get confusion where your tenants say, how come I can't sign up for gas? Some properties have no gas. So they have electric water heaters, electric HVAC systems, and all that. If you want to help out your tenants with utilities, advise them on the Wi-Fi situation. Let them know their choices. Hey, you can call these 2 companies, these 3 companies. because they might want to do this a week, 2 weeks in advance. It's just not fun to move in, then think of it, then wait a week or two to get internet. You know how life feels with no internet. It frickin' sucks. Make sure utilities are in their name before they move in, because if they're in your name, you might realize a month later that you've been paying their summertime AC bill, and that's not fun. Or if they've left faucet on and went on vacation and you get a $400 water bill. Make sure that stuff's in their name. Last but not least is number 4, make sure that they pay the first month's rent before they move in. It needs to be in verified funds, or it needs to be what I call immediate funds. Not a time to write a check, have them move in, then have it bounce 3 days later. Come to find out the security deposit bounced too. They have no money. You have none of their money. They live in your property and they're not planning on moving out until they're evicted. Now, this hasn't happened to me before, but I've seen it happen to people. You just got to watch out for it. One of the reasons it hasn't happened to me is because I have strict rental criteria. See my other videos. The way that I do this is maybe different than some people do. When somebody has all 4 of these things done and it's time for them to move in, I give them the code to the keys that are on the front door in a lockbox. So what that means is I don't have to go meet them. You can go meet them if you want, if you have time. I don't have to go meet them to let them move in. I just give them the code so they can retrieve their own keys, move in, don't have to coordinate times, and you can go get your lockbox later and say hi if you want to. That's how I handle all this. What about late fees and an eviction notice? I'm just going to cover this real quick because I'm going to do another video about it. When your tenants move in, if they're late paying the rent, late's going to depend on your lease and your state, but for me, it's 3 days after the rent was due on the 1st. It's technically late. Then there's a late fee that's usually 10% of the rent. On that day, I tell them you've been assessed a late fee. You need to pay that money. I also send out a letter called a pay or quit notice. Essentially, it's an eviction notice. Hey, if you don't pay the late fee plus the rent in a certain amount of time, 7 business days in this state, then I'm going to start the eviction process. That might seem kind of crazy to do after a couple days late, but what I've found is when you send this out, you sort of get your tenants into the habit of paying you on time. They don't like seeing that letter. I send that letter every month as soon as it's late. Most people kind of snap into shape quickly. Okay, my landlord isn't a pushover. He's serious about rent. I guess I'll have to pay on time. They'll find somebody else to not pay on time. Don't let it be you. Was this helpful to you? I want to hear in the comments your thoughts on this. Hit that subscribe button for me. Give me a like. Make me happy. This is Rich on Money, signing off.